Assalamu alaikum dears, and greetings to all of you. Welcome dears to this video. I would be delighted to introduce an informative and quick session in this channel, which focuses on Islamic finance insights. Please support us by subscribing and following upcoming videos. So, let's start our session. Hybrid securities. In this session we are going to deal with the Sukuk as hybrid securities. In other words, we are intended to explain that maybe Sukuk are those types of securities which are categorized neither as common bonds nor stocks. Instead, they are considered as a third type of securities, like hybrid securities in Western countries. So, following the comparison made previously between Sukuk, bonds and stocks, we are going to compare Sukuk and hybrid securities in this section and to introduce Sukuk as a new type of these securities. What is a hybrid security? Hybrid security is a security that combines elements of debt securities and equity securities. Hybrid securities typically promise to pay a rate of return fixed or floating until a certain date, in the same way debt securities do. However, they also have equity-like features that they provide a higher rate of return than regular debt securities. In some cases, this is because they give the holder an option to convert the hybrid securities into equity securities, typically ordinary shares, which will give the holder an equity kicker if the underlying equity securities perform well. In other cases, it may be that the hybrid securities have equity-like risks attached and the issuer has to pay a higher rate of return to compensate investors for those risks. Hybrid securities are being introduced all the time to meet the needs of sophisticated investors. Some securities are difficult to define them as either debt or equity. In addition to being difficult to understand, another criticism of some hybrid securities is that they require the investor to take more risk than the potential return warrants. Sukuk and hybrids. Upon the research findings, we believe Sukuk to be maybe new hybrid instruments. That is, they bear features of both stocks and bonds. For example, asset-backed Sukuk-like stocks are considered as a type of partnership, and, as the shareholder owns a part of the company as an asset, holder of Sukuk becomes also the owner of a part of an asset or a partner in a project. From this perspective, Sukuk are similar to stocks. On the other hand, Sukuk could be of both registered like lease-based Sukuk and non-registered like partnership-based Sukuk forms, just like stocks. But, on the contrary to stocks, even if theoretically holder of Sukuk owns the asset, he has no voting right as to the asset or project-related decision-makings. Moreover, asset-backed Sukuk holder benefits from priority right against other creditors, in case of liquidation or bankruptcy of issuer company, and he may collect his principal capital from related asset, before other creditors. While this is not the same with stocks, and shareholder is entitled to his capital from what has been remained from the asset, after settlement made with all of the creditors. Sukuk system is based on profit and loss like stock system, i.e. like the shareholder, Sukuk holder would be also theoretically sharing profit and loss. Therefore, maybe we could say that if Sukuk holder practically shares profit and loss, Sukuk just like stocks would be a costly method of financing for investee. Because he has to share the obtained profit with Sukuk holders, like what takes place in terms of stocks. Of course, in recent years we are more observing payment of a fixed profit to Sukuk holders just like bonds, and they are not sharing real profit and loss of the asset or project, in practice. But they try to invest in the profitable projects. On the other hand, at least theoretically in an asset-backed Sukuk also investor is more at risk because of sharing the loss as it is the case with the stocks, comparing to other methods of investment. However, practically the risk is covered via different methods, including insurance, In terms of bankruptcy risk, asset-backed Sukuk are of the minimum risk for the issuer, just like stocks, because, theoretically, it is not a bond with fixed income. Instead, it is a kind of partnership in the asset or project ownership. So, in case of sudden bankruptcy of business owned by the issuer, the risk resulted from loss of that asset is imposed on Sukuk holder as an owner to a part of it, just as this is the case with stocks and related shareholders bearing the risk. It goes without saying that, in case the underlying asset is not lost, Sukuk holder is of priority right for receipt of his principal capital from the asset, in relation to other creditors. Due to various reasons, Sukuk are also similar to bonds. For example, although theoretically they are of no specified and fixed profit, in practice some of them asset-based Sukuk are very similar to bonds, and investors usually receive a fixed profit. Like bonds and contrary to stocks, Sukuk bear due dates. Although the instrument is indicative of some sort of partnership and ownership of the holder in respect of the asset, like bonds, it lacks right of voting and interfering in underlying asset. Apparently, ownership of Sukuk holder is not real and practically like the holder of bond, he is a creditor rather than an owner of the asset or partner thereto, at least in asset-based Sukuk. In terms of tax rules and regulations, Sukuk, like bonds, need to be exempted from tax. They could not be treated like stocks and be liable to tax payment just because of partnership and ownership. In other words, they have to be dealt with like bonds in this respect. Currently, most tax systems around the world are structured to handle conventional bonds, but lack some of the specific attributes necessary to work with Sukuk and other Islamic financial instruments. There are several reasons why the appropriate legal structures are necessary for the use of Sukuk. These types of Islamic securities usually involve multiple transfers due to the nature of how they are backed by real assets rather than working on the basis of interest. Legal structures that are not designed to handle this will tax every transfer, creating an unsustainable situation for those involved in the Sukuk transaction. The main reason for this is that Sukuk often require that ownership of the asset covered by the Sukuk be transferred repeatedly from one party to another. Ownership of assets in many regions requires additional tax duties and often involves other legal transactions that incur additional costs. In the Sukuk structure, when the asset is transferred to the SPV issuer from the originator and moved back, there will be transfer of legal ownership and beneficial ownership of the underlying asset. In common law systems, the law recognizes that only beneficial ownership is transferred to Sukuk holder when the asset moves and legal ownership is retained by the original owner of asset. Therefore, the asset is not double taxed with one legal owner. On the other hand, most civil law regimes do not have a separate ownership concept. Without special provisions for Sukuk, this characteristic of Islamic financial instruments puts them at a severe disadvantage if the right legal frameworks do not exist. A typical example is an Ijara Sukuk structure. In these cases, the initial transfer of asset ownership can trigger capital gains, sales tax, holding tax, and stamp duty. Each time a transfer of ownership occurs, which will happen at least twice, these taxes would be required, unlike conventional bonds which would only be taxed according to their capital gains. One hurdle when creating the necessary legal framework for Sukuk in a country's legislation is the differential treatment between profit and interest. Most of the time, interest payments are tax deductible. On the other hand, profit is taxable and Sukuk is based on profit-loss system. In 2010, the United Kingdom, France, Luxembourg, and Ireland issued tax neutrality laws that ensured that Sukuk transactions would be tax neutral with conventional bonds. Different types of hybrids in comparison to Sukuk. As mentioned previously, there are three broad categories of hybrid securities. 1. Convertible converting debt securities. 2. Preference shares and Sukuk. 3. Capital notes. Convertible converting debt security and Sukuk. A convertible debt security is one that gives either the investor or the issuer the option to convert it into another type of security at a specified date in the future. Often this will be ordinary shares in the issuer. We want to notice that Sukuk can be convertible too, means that we have some Sukuk called convertible or exchangeable Sukuk. This security is a type of Sukuk structure in which Sukuk certificates have an embedded option giving the Sukuk holders the right, without the obligation, to exchange Sukuk into real assets. Sukuk holders can convert their current holdings into a number of predetermined amount of real assets after a specific period. Conversion is typically subject to preset conditions, e.g., lockup period after subscription. Exchangeable Sukuk are instrumental for investors who seek to protect their position in Sukuk, i.e., against unsecured periodic distributions. They can walk away from the Sukuk contract by exchanging their Sukuk holdings into real assets currently of the originator. The exchange ratio depends on the current price of the Sukuk. Such as, if the Sukuk price is less than the underlying asset price, the Sukuk holders may choose to exchange and vice versa. This allows Sukuk holders to react to unfavorable economic conditions affecting Sukuk. As we can see, convertible Sukuk is like convertible bond, and as investors can avoid risks of reduction of share price and enjoy increase of that through convertible bonds, they can enjoy the Sukuk and convert them to the asset on the downside of Sukuk price through convertible Sukuk. So these Sukuk can be attractive for investors. As well as we have another type of Sukuk called contingent convertible COCO Sukuk. It is a type of Sukuk structure in which Sukuk certificates give the Sukuk holders a contingent right to convert their holdings into equity. Contingent convertible Sukuk become convertible if the price value of the issuer's equity rises a certain amount from the date of Sukuk issuance. COCO Sukuk is somewhat similar to convertible bonds because they can be exchanged to equity, but opposite to convertible bonds, they are not optional but are contingent to increase of the share price to determined amount. Preference shares and Sukuk. Preference shares, more commonly referred to as preferred stock, are shares of a company's stock with dividends that are paid out to shareholders before common stock dividends are issued. If the company enters bankruptcy, the shareholders with preferred stock are entitled to be paid from company assets first. Most preference shares have a fixed dividend, while common stocks generally do not. Preferred stock shareholders also typically do not hold any voting rights, but common shareholders usually do. Among different hybrid securities, simple Sukuk called plain vanilla Sukuk are without any additional features such as option to convert or exchange into equity at a certain time, are more like preference shares. Sukuk confers on its holder a right of ownership to the underlying assets. This is the central aspect of Sukuk's share-like characteristics. Under this circumstance, Sukuk holders become an owner of the underlying asset or project. The holders of Sukuk do not have voting rights, just like most of preference shares. Preference shares usually have maturity date, and Sukuk have maturity date too. Like holders of preference shares, asset-backed Sukuk holders are entitled to a payment of value of the Sukuk according to price of the underlying asset in the market and ahead of any distribution or payment of surplus assets to others. It is necessary to notice that there is also a type of Sukuk named senior Sukuk which has features like preference shares. It is a type of Sukuk structure in which Sukuk holders get paid in full before other claim holders. This is because the senior Sukuk holders have a high-ranking claim over the underlying assets in the event of default or redemption. Seniority means the Sukuk holders' claims rank superior vis-a-vis others against the issuer, and the Sukuk holders of the same rank have similar rights and rank pari passu among themselves. Capital notes. Capital notes are debt securities that have equity-like features attached. Examples include perpetual debt securities, subordinated debt securities, and knockout debt securities. Perpetual debt securities and Sukuk. These are debt securities with no fixed maturity date, have final redemption date. They are regarded as hybrid securities because they are a debt security with equity-like features like a share. They don't mature. These hybrids are comparable to perpetual Sukuk. It does not mature, and hence Sukuk are treated as equity rather than debt. Viewed as part of capital. Sukuk holders cannot redeem their certificates Sukuk unless a redemption trigger event occurs. In case of redemption, Sukuk may be redeemed in whole but not in part. Perpetual Sukuk have the features of permanence and loss absorption, which means the Sukuk carry a perpetual legal tenure and subordinated to debt and other liabilities of the issuer of such perpetual Sukuk. Perpetual Sukuk are innovative form of debt instruments from a legal standpoint with equity-like features that typically rank senior only to common equity. Subordinated debt securities and Sukuk. These are debt securities whose rights with respect to payment of interest and repayment of principal rank behind are subordinated to another class or classes of debt. There is also a kind of Sukuk called subordinated Sukuk. Is a type of Sukuk structure in which Sukuk certificates give Sukuk holders residual claim over the assets financed by their funds. This claim ranks after the claims of other creditors and unrestricted profit-sharing investment accounts UPSIA. Contrary to the conventional sense of subordination, subordinated Sukuk do not represent creditor claims that rank after those of other creditors, as this would be inconsistent with Sharia principles and precepts. Subordinated Sukuk allow Islamic banks to strengthen their Tier 2 capital. Knockout debt securities and Sukuk. These are debt securities that give the issuer or a third party such as a prudential regulator a right to extinguish them under certain conditions. They are regarded as hybrid securities because they are a debt security with equity-like features in certain circumstances, like a share. They have no right to a return of capital. Although there are not any rights such as this option for the issuer of Sukuk, but because of partial ownership of holder of asset-backed Sukuk and underlying asset, it is possible for that asset to be destroyed and the holder should bear the losses and has no right to a return of capital because holder has participated in a partnership and accepted profits and losses together, so at least theoretically, they are not able to claim about that asset anymore. As we can see, Sukuk asset-backed one can be like knockout bonds in some aspects. However, it is possible for issuer or originator of Sukuk to accept the losses through pre-agreement or insure the underlying asset and through this avoid the risks of Sukuk investor. Risks of conventional hybrids in comparison with Sukuk. Some key risks related to hybrid securities are interest rate risk, credit risk, and liquidity risk. Here we want to explain about insolvency risk and credit risk in Sukuk in comparison with mentioned securities. Each type of hybrid security has unique risk and reward characteristics. Convertible bonds offer greater potential for appreciation than regular bonds, but pay less interest than conventional bonds and still face the risk that the underlying company could perform poorly and fail to make coupon payments or not be able to repay the bond's face value at maturity. Convertible securities offer greater income potential than regular securities, but can still lose value if the underlying company underperforms. Other risks of hybrid securities include deferred interest payments, insolvency, market price volatility. However, we want to say that in asset-backed Sukuk, the risk of insolvency and credit risk maybe not exist. Actually, it is necessary to differentiate asset-backed and asset-based Sukuk, as their character is different in case of default. Asset-backed Sukuk is directly related to the underlying asset as guided by the Sharia principle. This Sukuk structure is therefore more in accord with Sharia principles, in which any risks related to and credibility of the Sukuk are directly related to underlying assets. The risk or loss derived from underlying asset is subject to be borne by the Sukuk holder as a real owner of assets. In line with ownership of underlying asset, asset-backed Sukuk holder has recourse towards underlying asset in case of default, which means the Sukuk holder could take the underlying asset to cover their losses. So, in an asset-backed structure, true sale should be executive. Asset-based Sukuk, on the other hand, does not undertake true sale in the structure. This is more aligned with conventional bond structures. The Sukuk holder has a right that covers the underlying asset rather than ownership of the underlying asset itself. Accordingly, they have recourse to the originator in case of default. In this regard, the investor's concern will differ depending on whether they are focused on the asset value itself or on the creditworthiness of obligor. In the process of issuance of asset-backed Sukuk based on underlying asset and in relation to the specific asset working as the basis for their issuance, Sukuk holders have objective and in fact priority right, comparing to other creditors, so they would not be faced with bankruptcy risk. Of course, in case the same specific asset is lost, the loss will be imposed on Sukuk holders, as the owners of that asset. As for example in convertible bonds, performance of the issuing company affects price of security in the market. In terms of Sukuk also, reduction of price of underlying asset will affect price of Sukuk security in the market. In other words, holder of asset-backed Sukuk as the owner of the asset receives the value of the underlying asset based on current market price on the due date, while the value may have been reduced. It should be mentioned that a solution has also been forecasted regarding the risk of reduction of underlying asset value, and the risk will be eliminated with the help of insurance companies. Moreover, from credit risk point of view, in asset-backed Sukuk, the holders are considered as the owners of the asset, and in case the issuer fails to make the payments, they may collect their rights from the asset, while this is not the case with other securities including hybrids. In this point we reached to the end of today's session. I hope that this video provided an informative and quick session. If you are interested in this area, kindly subscribe in the channel because we are planning to provide deep information as well as the latest reports and news about Islamic finance. We look forward to your subscribing, your like, as well as your suggestions in the comments. Have a good time and best regards.